After nearly 2 years of devastating war in Gaza, hopes of a breakthrough. Israel and Hamas prepare to negotiate on Donald Trump's plan to free hostages and end the fighting. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. On the domestic political front, it's been another messy week for the Liberal Party. Andrew Hastie has quit the front bench. He now joins Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price on the back bench. Two fellow Conservatives who want to shift the party further to the right on migration and climate change. While the coalition fights over its future direction, the Prime Minister has been focused on foreign policy. He's back home after talks in the US, UK and UAE on progress towards peace in the Middle East. Donald Trump's plan to end the war in Gaza has produced some of the most promising signs in a very long time. A range of sticking points could still bring it all undone, but at least Israel and Hamas are willing to talk.
Are you confident, sir, there'll be peace in Gaza anytime soon?
This is a big day, potentially one of the great days ever in civilization.
Israel has agreed to a 20-point plan
to end the war in Gaza.
We're taking a critical step towards ending the war in Gaza.
And let's call it eternal peace in the Middle East.
أتمنى أن توقف الحرب.
كل مسألة إسرائيل.
تأمل من الله إنه ينجح ويمشي الأمور بس ما فيش عنا.
This proposal calls for the
dismantle Hamas's military capabilities,
the release of all remaining hostages immediately,
end its political rule.
Australia welcomes President Trump's plan.
The coalition very much welcomes this plan.
I certainly have welcomed the opportunity to discuss the plans for a ceasefire moving forward.
I don't believe Prime Minister Albanese had any insight into this whatsoever.
I support your plan to end the war in Gaza, which achieves our war aims.
Israel has agreed to the deal, but will Hamas?
We're just waiting for Hamas.
Arab and Muslim nations have urged Hamas to accept the terms of the plan.
All of the Arab countries are signed up, the Muslim countries are all signed up.
But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, then Israel will finish the job by itself.
Maybe you'd have our full backing to do what you would have to do.
This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way. But it will be done.
President Trump has given Hamas a deadline of Sunday evening. He said that unless they agreed, all hell would break out against them.
Hamas has announced it will agree to immediately enter negotiations.
We don't need the weapon if there is no occupation. We will never accept anyone not Palestinian, to control the Palestinian.
Taken against my will by Israeli forces.
A fleet of pro-Palestinian activist boats has been intercepted by the Israeli Navy.
Mass protests have broken out following Israel's interception.
There's been a terror attack at a synagogue in Manchester.
In the car and knife rampage, the suspect was shot dead.
The senseless violence coming on one of the holiest days on the Jewish calendar.
We will do everything to keep our Jewish community safe.
Our Prime Minister calling it a heinous attack.
I just felt sick.
The terror in Manchester has sent shockwaves throughout Australia's Jewish community.
Jews all around the world right now are terrified.
The Jewish community is on edge.
Now we do need to draw a line in the sand.
Thank you.
My guest this morning is the Greens leader, Larissa Waters. First, let's check what's making news. In the 9 newspapers, Susan Lee is safe for this year. Coalition Conservatives have ruled out any immediate challenge to the leader after Andrew Hastie quit the front bench. He plans to spend his time working on his vision for the party. And I can report 3 names are being considered to fill the shadow Home Affairs portfolio: Julian Leeser, James McGrath and John O'Doniam. An announcement won't be made while Parliament is sitting this week. The ABC's Tom Crowley's done a deep dive on the government's signature Housing Australia Future Fund. He's obtained documents showing the project is gathering steam, but is still running behind schedule and costing more than first expected. The average cost per home so far, more than $750,000. And to the big news from the Middle East. Israel is sending a delegation to Egypt for talks with Hamas on the peace plan put forward by Donald Trump. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed his nation earlier this morning.
We are on the verge of a very significant achievement. It's not final yet. We are working on it diligently, and I hope, God willing, that in the coming days, even during the Sukkot holiday, I will be able to announce the return of all our hostages, both the living and the fallen, in one phase, with the IDF remaining in the depth of the Strip and in the areas that control it.
And I spoke a short time ago to the ABC's Middle East correspondent, Matthew Doran, in Tel Aviv. Matt, thanks so much for joining us very late at night over there. Look, what can you tell us about the next steps from here?
David, good morning. We are expecting to see negotiations on some of these final elements, the issues that Hamas wants dealt with before it can sign on the dotted line, to happen on Monday in Cairo. Egypt, of course, has been a key mediator in this conflict for many, many months now, along with Qatar. And we understand that there are already negotiating teams being dispatched to Cairo to begin some of that work, both direct talks and indirect talks, including the United States, with the Special Envoy for the Middle East from the White House, Steve Witkoff, among those who are travelling to Cairo to take part there. It does appear, however, that there are already discussions happening behind the scenes, particularly between the US and Israel, as to the next steps, now that Hamas has shown its hand and delivered this yes but sort of response. And we are getting a bit of a sense as to what Israel would be prepared to agree to and what the US sees as feasible. But Donald Trump clearly very impatient to see an outcome here, saying that Hamas does need to avoid any delays and come to an agreement so that peace can be found in Gaza, something he wants to be front and centre of his legacy, quite aside from the broader geopolitical issues that are at play here as well.
And just on that point you make about what Israel is likely to agree to here, when we look at where Hamas is where the sticking points are likely to be, Hamas will want Israeli forces out of Gaza as quickly as possible. What's your sense of Benjamin Netanyahu's position here and perhaps the political pressure he's under there in Israel as well? How likely is he going to be to agree to pull out of Gaza?
Well, this is one of the main issues, whether or not there would be an ongoing Israeli military presence in Gaza under any ceasefire. Hamas has always demanded a total and immediate withdrawal of Israeli troops, but Benjamin Netanyahu has been very clear that there would still be a presence for Israeli forces inside Gaza, that there would be a phased withdrawal, and eventually those Israeli forces would occupy what's being described as a buffer zone. When it comes to his own personal politics or the political wrangling that is going to be happening here in Israel, he is under significant pressure to deliver an outcome. We were just in Hostage Square here in Tel Aviv earlier this evening. Tens of thousands of people pouring into that place, as they do each and every Saturday, demanding that the Netanyahu government get out of the way, sign a deal and get those remaining 48 Israeli hostages back home. But within his own cabinet as well, he faces some very stiff criticism, mainly from his far-right coalition partners. So there are some very delicate politics to be played here, or to be sorted out here, and that has been one of the key criticisms of Benjamin Netanyahu for a very, very long time, that he is continuing this war only to shore up his own political fortunes and avoid things like an election, which will have to be held sometime next year, which the polls are suggesting he will struggle to win, certainly struggle to win in his own right without a coalition of parties there. So it is an incredibly delicate time. That politics is incredibly important in Israel, but we do need to, of course, remind ourselves that the devastation we are seeing on the ground in Gaza is almost unimaginable, and the death toll there has exceeded now 67,000 Palestinians since the start of this war, after those deadly October 7 attacks by Hamas almost 2 years ago. David.
Matt Doran, thank you very much for that. Well, let's bring in our panel. We're joined this morning by Jacob Greber, Samantha Maiden, and welcome to the Insider's Couch, Tom McIlroy. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Dave.
Jacob, history tells us we shouldn't get too excited about this peace plan. It could easily fall apart. They so often do. However, this does seem more promising than anything we've seen for a long time from the Middle East.
I mean, anyone who's been around, the few of the last decades knows this stuff goes wrong, historically speaking, but you have here a very different set of circumstances. You have you've got a Western bloc of countries that are pushing hard for recognition. They want to see a Palestinian state after this is all resolved. And you have a president in the United States who does not want to be left behind by that momentum and is throwing his full weight behind it. He wants a peace deal. He wants to win that Nobel Peace Prize. And he's pushing Netanyahu hard. And the tell for that is the response from the far right in Netanyahu's government. Very, very unhappy about where this is headed. So we're heading towards the end game, and you've got to put all the usual caveats on this. It can unravel. The Hamas is not yet there, but it feels like it's close, so we'll have to wait and see.
And the fact that Donald Trump owns this plan, Sam, is critical as well, right? He's the only one really who can, well, he has told Israel to apologise for the attack on Qatar. He told them the other night, stop the bombing. So he has that power that no one else has.
Yes, and I think that, that there is that sense that, I mean, if it's successful, it'll be the most important thing that Donald Trump does. I think that there are already a lot of good things to flow out of the deal. Number one, the idea that the hostages are going to be repatriated, and obviously the idea of a ceasefire. But in terms of how this operates on the ground, I think that that's where there's really big questions about, you know, who is going to be the force on the ground, how that is going to work, what is going to happen when there inevitably will be the remainder of Hamas left on the ground. There will be attacks, people will die, and how will Donald Trump react to that? And
yeah, it's pretty clear, isn't it, Tom, those sticking points. Will Hamas agree to disarm and play no role in whatever authority runs the joint? And will Israel, as Matt Doran was explaining, will Israel pull out anytime soon from Gaza? It doesn't sound like Netanyahu is that keen to withdraw.
No, I think Israel's maintaining a defensive posture right now. I see it as a major step. If the hostages are released and Hamas takes any steps towards disarming, that would be a huge sign. But usually in the past 2 years, the negotiations have been the breakdown point. That's where we're up to now. I think the force of Trump and the pressure that's being put on Netanyahu to end the war is significant, but there's too many moving pieces to know what's going to happen.
In terms of the political debate in Australia over this, there has been a bit of argument over what role Australia, joining others like the UK, Canada, France and so on, in recognising Palestinian statehood played, if any, in getting to this point. Obviously the Prime Minister is suggesting that yes, it did add to momentum. Perhaps those Arab states wouldn't have been so willing to back the plan without this movement from the Western Bloc behind Palestinian recognition. Donald Trump, we know, opposes recognising Palestinian statehood. But I thought this comment was interesting.
Several countries have foolishly recognized the Palestinian state. As you know, some of our European friends, allies, good people, but they're really, I think, doing that because they're very tired of what's going on for so many decades.
So, Jacob, he's acknowledging they're fed up. This frustration.
To hear Donald Trump have essentially empathy for countries that he just said are foolish, and in the next breath he's sort of saying, I understand why they've done this, is a big deal. And I think it is the indicator of why the Prime Minister does have a sense of vindication. He was criticised very, very heavily, continues to be, for recognising Palestine. And one of the really hard criticisms that he copped was, this will slow down a peace process. This will make it impossible for peace to occur. And actually at this point in time, and again, we're all caveating this, it looks like it's headed in that direction. So they're feeling, the government's feeling pretty good about that decision.
Yeah, I also spoke for the podcast this week to the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Omar Awadallah, about this, about the role that those Western countries, including Australia, have played here. Here's what he told us.
The recognition is, in a way or another, is a tangible and irreversible step toward implementing the two-state solution, the solution that we think that the only viable solution that can bring peace and security. We do believe that Australia did that part in that contribution.
Now, look, maybe the Palestinians would say that they're very keen to see others recognise statehood, but Sam, do you agree that we've seen some momentum brought about by countries recognising statehood? Well,
critics of that view argue that it sort of enraged elements of the right wing in Israel, and they started talking about, annexing part of the West Bank. They were probably talking about that already, but like that is the criticism. Look, I wouldn't have thought that Australia played a huge role in all of this.
Not alone, but that grouping of Canada, UK, France and all the others?
I think it is reflective of what Donald Trump suggested. There are even elements, I think, of the Republicans and, you know, the conservative movement in the US that were basically sick of this going on and concerned about, you know, where it stops.
All the while, Tom, we had this terrible reminder in Manchester in the UK the other day of this attack on a synagogue there, that anti-Semitism is very much still a huge danger, a violent danger. The concerns that we could see something like that here as well. It really has reminded everybody that this remains a very, very difficult time for Jewish people as well.
Yeah, I think the security agencies here in Australia and the government as well will be looking at that attack very nervously. We've obviously seen significant problems for Jewish communities in Australia, places of worship under attack, but the security settings around them are already very high. It's just awful to see on such an important Jewish feast day this kind of violence destabilising and making governments nervous around the world.
Right, we're going to come back to the Liberal Party and their latest woes around Andrew Hastie. Time now, though, to talk to the Greens leader, Larissa Waters. To take us there, here was Donald Trump on the support from Arab and Muslim states for his peace plan.
Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and so many others. So many people fought so hard. This is a big day. Everybody was unified in wanting this war to end and seeing peace in the Middle East. And we're very close to achieving that. Thank you all, and everybody will be treated fairly.
Larissa Waters, welcome to the program.
Hi, David. Good morning.
So do you support this peace plan announced by Donald Trump?
Well, we are desperate to see an end to the genocide and the starvation and the horrors and, of course, the return of hostages. And we hope that these negotiations will continue and be successful, because the humanitarian disaster, the genocide that's unfolded, that Australia has very much been a part of by selling weapons to that conflict and by failing to have decent sanctions, we very much hope that that will come to its conclusion. But self-determination for Palestinians has to be a part of a lasting and just peace. And having foreign billionaires or folk like Tony Blair or Donald Trump in charge is frankly very dubious. So we'll keep watching to see how these negotiations unfold, but the focus really has to be on how can Australia now keep the pressure on the Israeli government to make sure that the killing ends and the starvation ends. We've put about 1,400 sanctions on Russia, and rightly so, and we've put barely a dozen on this genocidal regime. So we have called now for many, many years, for almost the whole 2 years of this genocide, for there to be serious sanctions and for us to stop selling weapons parts to this conflict. It is unforgivable that we are selling the parts that allow those bomb doors to open and, such as just yesterday, have lethal consequences. We saw that the aerial bombing hasn't stopped while these so-called peace talks are underway.
So coming back to the plan itself, some of the key principles are to see a transitional authority take control, a peace board chaired by Donald Trump with Tony Blair as a member. It sounds like you have a problem with that.
Well, look, I think Palestinian people deserve to determine their own fate and their own future government. And we want to see the genocide end, as I've said, but it's very important that Palestinians are in charge of the decision for what comes next for them.
Authority.
Not so much Donald Trump, the man who's renamed his defence ministry to a war ministry. It's just also very bizarre that putting that man in charge of anything would lead to peace. But we remain hopeful for actually a self-determined, just and lasting peace that ends that genocide.
Okay, so just to be clear on this, you don't support a transitional authority at all?
Well, look, it's not up to us. It's up to Palestinians to decide what future governance they want. But right now, they want a ceasefire and they want to stop being killed and massacred while they're trying to access aid. And speaking of aid, folk would have seen this week that because there's been this blockade of aid shipments, that a whole group of civilians, including 6 Australians, have been on a global flotilla to try to get aid to that zone. And now we see that 6 Australians have been illegally abducted by the Netanyahu regime, and I haven't heard a peep on that from the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister.
The government
we should be demanding.
They're contacting the Israelis, trying to get access, but they've also been warning Australians not to take part in those sort of attempts to break the naval blockade because of the obvious dangers. Are you saying Australians should be doing that?
Well, that aid needs to get through, and I think it's appalling that it's taken global civilians to try to get food to Gaza. That should have been something that the Israeli government allowed to occur. There should not be a war of starvation. But I would like to see Foreign Minister Wong call on the Israeli ambassador here in Australia to let those 6 Australians be free and come home.
Okay.
And if that ambassador's not prepared to do that, well, we should be expelling the Israeli ambassador, and we need to make sure that the Australian ambassador in Gaza is getting those citizens back and shepherding them to safety. And our government should be doing everything it can to get our citizens home safely. Surely that's their one job.
Coming back to what happens now to achieve peace in Gaza, do you agree that Hamas should play no role whatsoever in any future governing role?
Well, of course, and I think even Hamas have accepted that. But what's important is not what I think or what Donald Trump thinks, but what Palestinians have the right to self-determine about their future. That's the only way we'll have a just and lasting peace, and that's, in fact, what Palestinians deserve.
2 people were killed, as we mentioned, in that synagogue attack in Manchester the other day, on the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. What was your reaction to this, and has it changed your view at all about the danger and the threat posed by anti-Semitism?
Oh, look, my heart goes out to the families of those people. No violence anywhere is acceptable, and this is exactly why we need a resolution that is based on self-determination, and why Australia should have, 2 years ago, imposed serious sanctions on the Israeli government, who have been conducting a genocide and starving people, children. It is utterly appalling, and yet we have been selling weapons to that conflict
Senator,
and not imposing the same sanctions.
Sorry to butt in, but I am asking you about anti-Semitism and the fatal attack we saw in a synagogue in Manchester.
And we've condemned, and we have condemned that.
Are more steps needed here to prevent a similar incident here?
Well, look, of course we have condemned that, and as I said, our hearts go out to those families. Violence on any basis is not acceptable, and we need to have social cohesion, and part of that is Australia doing what's necessary to stand up for humanitarian justice, and that's why we need those sanctions, and that's why we've got to stop selling weapons components that are dropping bombs on 12-year-olds collecting
you keep
water.
coming back to the weapons, but my question is about anti-Semitism. Do you support the recommendations of the government's anti-Semitism envoy when it comes to the further steps that are needed here?
Look, we oppose anti-Semitism just as we oppose violence on any basis. Now, the envoy's reports had a series of recommendations, many of which were quite bizarre. What we need to see is an anti-racist approach to anti-Semitism, to Islamophobia, to all of it. None of it's acceptable, but I think the reason why tensions are so inflamed is that we've seen a genocide for 2 years that our government has refused to condemn, and in fact has been fueling by sending those weapons. Yes, I do keep mentioning them because Australians are horrified that our government is entering fresh contracts over the last 2 years to both sell weapons and buy weapons from that regime, and likewise to fail to properly sanction that regime. That is adding to the tensions, and we need to actually send that strong message that a lasting peace is what's needed, and self-determination is part of that. And not selling weapons is a key part of that, David.
I understand that point. Let's turn to climate change and the government's 2035 climate target announced a couple of weeks ago. You've argued that the 62 to 70% is inadequate. You say it needs to be at least 71%. But do you accept that even the target the government has announced will be difficult to achieve?
Well, just firstly on the 71, David, that's not adequate. 71 is what the states and territories' existing commitments would get us to already. And this Albanese government has lowballed that and has said 62 is perfectly fine, when all of the scientists are out here saying if you want to avoid 1.5 million people being displaced, their homes inundated within 5 to 10 k's of the coastline by 2050, then you need to have far higher targets. Many are saying net zero by 2035. I'm concerned that this 62% target just delivers for the coal and gas companies that have so much power and influence on this government and on the last. And people are right to be concerned that their future is imperilled just because this government won't stand up to the Woodsides or the Chevrons or the Glencores of the world. Those same polluting companies that aren't paying their fair share of tax and are now laughing all the way to the bank at this pathetic target that will imperil us all.
To achieve the target, though, the Climate Change Authority says the number of wind farms will need to quadruple. Do you support that?
We do need far more renewable energy, and I want to mention the sector plans that the government released on the same day as the targets.
Sorry, I'll just come back to the question. Sorry, just the question was, do you support quadrupling the number of wind farms in Australia?
Well, I support quadrupling renewable energy. I have an open mind as to what particular technology will be the most efficient.
Because the reason I raise wind farms is because it is proving to be a contentious issue within the Greens. Some of your colleagues and your predecessors, Bob Brown and Christine Milne, have issues around certain wind farms, the Robbins Island one in northern Tasmania. Where do you stand on this?
Well, obviously, renewable energy projects need to be sited in the right location that doesn't have adverse biodiversity impacts.
And is this one the right location at Robbins Island?
Well, I don't know very much about that. It seems to be in a wrong location.
Plenty of your colleagues do. You've got some of your current Senate colleagues, Peter Whish-Wilson, Nick McKim, who are also opposed to it. You're not sure?
I have not. It's got to be put in the right place, and we will be looking at that closely, and it is not right to jeopardise biodiversity, but we will need a big build of renewables, and we will need renewables on households and businesses to help bring costs down.
Is when it gets difficult, right? When you come down to, OK, here's where we're going to...
Well, this is why we need environmental laws that actually work. No, this is why we need environmental laws that actually work, David.
I'll come to those.
At the moment, as you know, they don't even consider climate impacts.
Yeah, and I'll come to the environmental laws, but this project, it's proving very contentious, as I say. Christine Milne, Bob Brown, Nick McKim, Peter Whish-Wilson, they're all saying it's a bad place to do it because of the impact on the orange-bellied parrot. You seriously haven't looked at this?
No, I accept that renewables have to be in the right place. And if this one isn't in the right place, well, let's look at somewhere else to put it. We are going to need large-scale renewables in far greater capacity than we have. We're going to need small-scale renewables as well. And what we're going to need is for the coal and gas companies to stop getting an absolute free ride like they are at the moment. We saw 16 days into this new term, they ticked off on the biggest gas project in the Southern Hemisphere for Woodside, again, a big political donor who also doesn't pay their fair share of tax.
Bottom line, should wind farms take priority over some of the local environmental concerns to ensure that we can get to these sort of targets you're talking about?
We are going to need to balance the need for large-scale and small-scale renewable energy against the needs of biodiversity. And I don't think it's beyond our ability, David, to find the right location for those projects. We'd like to see government be the ones investing in those projects. And I just don't think it's impossible to site them in the right place. That is very doable. But it's going to take this government to stop kowtowing to coal and gas all of the time, giving them approvals like confetti to turbocharge the climate disaster that their own climate risk report says is coming down the line.
I understand your point on that. When it comes to these environment laws, the government says it wants to speed up approvals but also deliver better environmental outcomes. The Greens were criticised in the last term, and you lost a number of seats, for being seen to be too obstructionist. Are you willing to stand in the way of these environmental law changes this time, or will you be more cooperative?
Well, David, just pick you up on that. It was the Prime Minister that killed that arrangement that we were about to ink for stronger environmental protection. So I'm afraid it was the Prime Minister blocking positive reform in that regard.
How cooperative will you be on this one?
Well, we're very happy to have talks with the Minister, and those talks have begun. But unfortunately, the Minister seems to be sending signals that he'd rather do a deal with the coalition for shitty environmental laws that don't protect the planet.
All right.
And that
he is negotiating with both sides. That's clear. You've acknowledged that. Are there any red lines for the Greens when it comes to these climate laws? Will you die in a ditch over a climate trigger or native forest logging? Are there any red lines?
Look, one of the best outcomes for both biodiversity and the climate would be if we ended native forest logging. That should be in our environmental laws. And likewise, climate. Those laws were written last century and they don't even require the Minister of the day to think about climate, let alone to block something on the basis of climate. Climate has to be a consideration, and they will continue to be a core demand of ours. You can't have environmental laws that don't protect the environment or think about the climate impacts of what we do.
So to be clear on that, if there is no climate trigger or climate consideration required by the Minister to approve a project, you won't back these laws?
Well, we haven't seen the laws yet, David, but we're sending strong messages that environmental laws that work, that actually protect the environment and act on the climate crisis, is a pretty core part of a law that's meant to be the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act.
I mean, the government argues its safeguards mechanism deals with the emissions, the climate emissions problem here, that it's not something that should be in the environmental approvals, that would slow down the approvals for things like wind farms and solar farms.
Well, the government's also talking about go zones, but what they should be talking about is no-go zones. And what I'm very interested to know that the Minister hasn't answered yet is the Bowen Basin going to be a go zone where there are 22 coal projects awaiting approval? Is this government going to continue to green light coal and gas, fossil fuel projects by big companies that make big donations to their re-election coffers but pay very little tax, in some cases none at all? That's what I'm concerned about, and the fact that the Minister hasn't clarified that yet is not a good sign.
And just finally, the other issue you raised there, native forest logging. I mean, the Prime Minister did at the election earlier this year promise no end to Tasmanian native forest logging, and Labor won nearly every seat in Tasmania. Do you really think he should break that promise now?
Oh, we urgently need to get out of native forest logging. I mean, look at the tourism industry in Tasmania. It is largely based on people visiting that beautiful state for its natural values. And we can keep those folk employed in plantation forestry. There are no losers there except the mega logging companies, again, who make big donations to both sides of politics.
So that's a red line as well. That will be a red line in this negotiation.
Yeah, protecting forests will always be something that the Greens push for. Likewise, climate action. So we'll have those negotiations, but it's pretty clear we need environmental laws that actually work.
And if you don't get those measures, you won't vote for this legislation?
Well, we haven't seen the legislation yet, David. We don't know what's in it. We're sending those strong messages on what we would like to see in it. And what we think Australians expect is an environment that's protected, a climate that's livable, and of course, action on the cost of living. Like, the government could be doing those things, but all it's doing is bending over backwards for big corporations and making life harder for people while trashing the planet. And nobody voted for that.
Greens leader Larissa Waters, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
All right, coming up, we will get to the Liberals' woes, Andrew Hastie moving to the backbench. Let's bring the panel back in, though. Jacob Greber, Samantha Maiden, Tom McIlroy. Jacob, just quickly on the environmental laws. This is something that Murray Watt, the Minister, wants to introduce at least by the end of the year. I mean, I'm sure he'd love to pass it by the end of the year. We'll see. He has been negotiating with both. He's got options, the Liberals or the Greens. What do you make of that position from Larissa Waters on their approach to these changes?
I heard there the price of success going up here for the government, the cost of which will be getting the Greens on board, getting them to settle on these issues that she's just outlined. And I think that's because the coalition feels this is not a problem that it needs to solve on behalf of the government. So the government doesn't have a lot of options here. They will probably have to negotiate this with the Greens. They've tried, they've come close before, and what you heard there was what the Greens are saying what the price will be.
And Albanese's not going to agree to end native forest logging after promising the Tasmanians and winning a bunch of seats there that he's not going to do it.
Right. And the same problem in New South Wales, where the industry continues to this day, but that is the pressure point.
Yep.
If he wants this to be done, that's where he's going to have to go.
Let's turn to the Liberals. Sam, why did Andrew Hastie quit?
Well, it's a good question. Look, I think the minutiae of this is that the Susan Lee camp argues that she had a conversation with him about the letter that was sent.
Just explain to people this letter.
So basically, what's the terminology? A charter letter. So these charter letters are probably more understood within government, that a Prime Minister would send them to a Minister saying this is the outline of all of the responsibilities of your portfolio. Now, this blew up this week. It was reported that those letters had been sent out. I think it was on Tuesday, and then by Friday, Andrew Hastie had quit. And in part, he said it was because in this letter, it said that he wouldn't have responsibility for immigration. And that's something that he's been speaking out where he's Instagram famous these days. Look, I think in terms of minutiae of it, the Susan Lee camp argues that they had a conversation about the contents of those letters about a month ago. So they argue that this shouldn't have been any surprise to him.
And I'm told in that conversation he didn't
raise any concern. And then they suggest, and he is obviously free to dispute this, that immigration wasn't even raised in his phone call with her this week saying that he was going to quit. That it wasn't specifically raised, nor was net zero. There was just this idea that, he can't sort of work within the Westminster system. There's obviously also this argument that as the Home Affairs spokesperson, he would be senior to the immigration.
That's normally how it works.
Yeah.
But in the last term, the opposition had Dan Tehan as immigration and James Patterson as Home Affairs, and they were both...
Yeah,
more
but I think, look, let's pull
to
the wider focus though, because it's probably more important than the minutiae. I think Andrew Hastie is a really interesting cat.
Yep.
I think he is probably one of the more interesting politicians they have. I still think of him as a bit of a newbie, which is probably unfair because he has actually been around for 10 years. I think that he has this incredible ability to cut through, and I really like the fact that he's intellectually independent. I think the fact that he's taken on Ben Roberts-Smith, for example, he played a real leadership role in basically saying, I don't like what was going on with that, I'm actually going to stand up and see some change. So I think he can show bravery for sure, but I think there's also questions about, I suppose, how much of a team player he is, how prepared he is to work within the group.
And this is the thing. I mean, Tom, what's your sense of it? Because this has been building for a few weeks, right? His social media posts, as Sam says, have been increasingly interesting, spicy. What's the view in the party? Are there people scratching their heads as to what's happened?
I think scratching their heads is right. Andrew Hastie's been the kind of figurehead for this Tony Abbott advanced section of the party, an increasingly emboldened right flank of the party, frustrated with Susan Lee's leadership and trying to have this contest of ideas about how the Liberal Party gets its mojo back. Do they go for the teal seats? Do they go in the One Nation direction? Andrew Hastie's of the view that a kind of muscular conservatism is the way to rebuild the party at the next election. I was surprised that he did this so soon. Obviously, immigration is the pointy end of the argument. I think Paul Scarr, the spokesman, wants a softer, more inclusive debate about that. He said he won't use that phrase of mass migration that Advance is trying to bring into the conversation. But it's challenging. I mean, if Andrew Hastie was the leader, he would expect his frontbenchers to adhere to the rules that Susan Lee's trying to hold him to.
Tom touches on it there. At the heart of this are two very different views as to what this party should be and what direction it should go in. Susan Lee keeps saying she wants to modernise. She wants to win back metropolitan voters, the urban seats that they need to form government one day. Andrew Hastie, I mean, have a listen to what he said yesterday in announcing that he's going. This is who he's targeting.
I think we're going through a period of renewal. I think the centre-right as a movement is fractured at the moment. We're seeing the One Nation vote increase quite significantly, and I think one of the jobs we have to do as a Liberal Party is reconstitute that natural constituency if we're going to win government. So I think that's the task going forward.
Jacob, is chasing back the One Nation votes the path to government?
Well, I mean, the opposition tends to get those votes anyway. The coalition gets those votes via preferences. So there's a lot of people on the other side of this debate within the Liberal Party scratching their heads about the wisdom of that particular strategy, because the cost of it will be you don't win the middle, you don't win the more moderate side of the ledger, and you won't be in government. That's not the only thing people are critical about Hastie, to me privately, from the Liberal Party. Well, they do contest this idea that he's a sort of someone who scores a lot of goals against Labor. Name me something where he's torn down a minister or upended a policy.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate criticism.
You know, taken some bark off the government. Now, there's a long list of people who you could name who do that quite regularly. People like James Paterson. There's a whole bunch of people who are much more effective. Hastie hasn't scored any big goals on that, and now he wants the top job. So there's quite a bit of
and look, just to be clear,
some fairly raw reviews of his performance in the last week or so.
Normally, when someone of that profile does this, you think, okay, when is the challenge going to happen? You know, how far away? That's not happening. There's no plotting or counting of numbers or anything like that going on at the moment. So for Susan Lee,
he wouldn't have the numbers at the moment.
No, correct.
What everyone tells you. Yeah.
But nonetheless, for Susan Lee, Sam, this is terrible. I mean, she's got Jacinda Price, Andrew Hastie sitting on the backbench, not to mention the Nats like Barnaby Joyce and so on. What does she do now to try and hold this show together?
Well, apparently she's going to bring back Jane Hume.
Well, I was suggesting that there's a possibility she might move not into the Home Affairs, but into the maybe. It's not certain. But the names being talked about for the Home Affairs are, as I mentioned, James McGrath, Julian Leeser, and John O'Donian.
Look, I think at the end of the day, Susan Lee's always got to work against that perception that she's an interim leader, right? And that they'll let her take the car for a spin around the block. Will they even give her an election to run to? But if they do, they don't think they're going to win, right? If they think they're going to win, they'll put someone else in differently. So that's the challenge she's got. I don't think it's a great look to have all of these people that are capable of capturing a bit of public attention, whether it's Jacinta Price, Jane Hume on Sunrise, and Andrew Hastie all wasting on the backbench. I don't think that's a great look. But you have to say that they've taken the decision in some respects to take themselves off the field, right? I mean, it's probably more Hastie than Jacinta Price, but like they've made these calls. So it's kind of, you know, what are you going to do?
There's also a view that on the upside for Susan Lee, amongst the shadow cabinet now, there's a lot more support for net zero. Those detractors that want to dump net zero, there's a few on the backbench, but people like Hastie and Jacinta Price.
But do you think they're going to stay quiet when the debate fires up?
No, exactly.
Where they are.
At the senior level, at the shadow cabinet level, that might be a bit easier. But look, this is going to be a rough road.
Yeah, and the other thing too is the question now everyone's asking is when does this challenge come? Lee is objectively, you know, struggling in a lot of ways. It's a tough gig that she's got. When does the challenge come and
from
what
who?
form?
And
from whom? And it's different to when you're contesting an empty seat, which is what it was immediately after the election. You're now having to tear down an existing leader. So the dynamic is different. That means the numbers play out differently.
I think counterintuitively, though, in the short term, I think that Susan Lee's actually strengthened, right? Because Angus Taylor is kind of weakened. Andrew Hastie has basically said, like, I'll take it when I think I might win. I'd like to spend some time with my young family. He's got the whole Perth situation.
And working on a manifesto.
Yeah, working on it. But I mean, look, well, that sounds a bit Tony Abbott-esque, doesn't it? It was going to be a book.
Battle lines.
Is there going to be an Andrew Hastie book?
That he was working on a book.
But yeah, like if I was Andrew Hastie, which I'm not, I still think he needs to work about some of the things on the craft of Parliament, right? Like, you know, not so long ago he was being touted as a potential deputy leader. He didn't seem to want that, which is kind of a little bit intriguing. But, you know, what does he know about being manager of government business or something like that? Like actually understanding how things are done on the floor of Parliament. There's more to being a leader and the immediate leader of the Liberal Party than some groovy Instagram posts.
The most successful leaders in our history have been people who understood Parliament deeply.
And I'm not sure if he does understand all of that. I think that's something that he could work on. Yeah.
Let's turn to Papua New Guinea. The Papua New Guinea Cabinet has now signed off on the defence treaty that clearly Australia was hoping they'd sign off on a couple of weeks ago when Anthony Albanese was there in Port Moresby. He was relaxed at the time. Turns out he had reason to be confident because now they've signed it. And the formal signing between the two leaders, James Marape and Albanese, is due to happen tomorrow morning here in Canberra after they've both attended the NRL Grand Final. Tom, stepping back from when it was signed and so on, what's the significance of this deal?
It's significant Australia will have a new formal ally, only the first in 70 years. The two defence forces will be able to work more closely together. PNG citizens and Australian citizens will be able to serve in the respective defence forces. Significantly, there's new language in the treaty that says that PNG can't do deals with China, with other parties, without proper consultation. I think that's probably the main game from the Albanese government.
Locking China out of this buffer zone to our north, essentially, Jacob, and that this is an Australian initiative, but you'd think one that the US actually, would welcome.
The government says it was PNG that came to Australia about this. And we had quite a bit of, I don't know what you'd call it, high-calorie, low-nutrition commentary 2 weeks ago about what an embarrassment this is that it didn't get signed. But actually what was going on was perhaps more on the PNG side. Now they've landed it. And I think it's super important for our ability to manage defence in that region. I mean, you can literally swim from Australian territory to PNG territory. The nightmare would be a third party, let's not name it, getting a position in a country so close to us. And the benefit for PNG is obviously it gets our resources, it gets our know-how. That's a big deal for them. And the big test now for the government is how does it do some of the other Pacific states where they're also pushing for similar deals.
There's obviously the Vanuatu security deal is still a little bit up in the air, but Fiji is sounding very keen now on some sort of deal or even treaty as well. The Fiji one would then, after the signing tomorrow, have to be passed by both parliaments. Won't be a problem here. And shouldn't be a problem in Papua New Guinea either. But
maybe it depends on who wins the NRL game.
Exactly. Our colleague Stephen Gedges was telling me it's surely likely to go through, but you never know. There's always a little bit of doubt in PNG politics.
But it's a big win for the Prime Minister as well with this trip coming up back to the White House.
Exactly. He's got that in his back pocket.
He can demonstrate to the White House we're doing this heavy lifting in our region. We're not relying on you to do it for us.
000 calls, Sam. Optus. Well, the problems, the failures there are being investigated by all sorts of inquiries. Now the opposition's trying to put some pressure on the government over its action or inaction on this as well. What do you think? Is this hurting the government, this one?
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, I think the government is incandescent with rage about this. And I think, left to their own devices, they'd subject Optus to a metaphorical firing squad. I mean, I think they are absolutely hot to trot to get things done. There's obviously going to be coronial inquiries, but I don't think the government necessarily wants to wait for all of that. I think they want to take action right away, and I think they're really dirty with Optus. I don't think there's any lack of political will to actually do something.
They're going to introduce legislation, as I understand, on Tuesday to beef up this 000 custodian that sits within the department and will oversee what is a pretty complicated system. But you're right, the anger is towards Optus for failing to let the regulator know, the public know, the government know, Telstra, which runs, calls are routed through Telstra for 000 ultimately, all of that. But there was this comment from the Minister, Annika Wells, that raised some eyebrows.
I'm still a new minister to the industry, so I would say I'm listening to everybody at the moment.
Tom, should any minister say that?
Not the best comment, and I think Annika Wells would own up to that at this point. She's previously served as the aged care minister and handled complex things. I think she meant that the communications portfolio is a challenging one to get across. I think that and the broader issue will be really well trodden over in estimates this week. But I think the government's right. What's the Optus board doing here, and what kind of scrutiny from ACMA, Nerita O'Loughlin, from Kerry Schott as the independent reviewer, what pointy change can they push through with Optus? I think
at the end of the day, if Optus weren't telling any of these folks that they're meant to tell, would a strengthened custodian have made any difference? It's a little unclear, isn't it?
I think the argument is that it's the ability to see in the system when calls are not going through that is the problem, and what the Guardian will do. And they need some legislation to give it a bit more teeth, is compel the telcos to provide that information in a more timely manner so that you can see.
I thought they had to do that already. I thought they had to do that already.
I think there's a whole lot of arguments that the reforms that they brought in after the first time things like this happened, where people didn't die, that Telstra and other telcos have actually already implemented that, but that Optus hasn't.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Look, quick one I want to squeeze in. It's as old as any political issue is, a stoush between the feds and the states over health funding, but the Labor states in particular are piling the pressure on the feds right now.
We are seeing more and more is being asked of our hospital system.
They're stuck there because there's no aged care bed for them.
The feds have got deeper pockets.
They've got deeper pockets. They've got to cough up, Jacob. Are the feds shortchanging the states and territories on health?
That depends who you ask this question to. The states say yes, absolutely. We had a deal signed back at the end of 2023 that the Commonwealth would take 42.5% of the cost of hospitals, up from in the 30s at the moment. The federal government will tell you yes, but there's also a second part to that deal, which is the annual increase in spending from the Commonwealth to the states. They say they've increased that by 13%, and they've pledged to do it 8%, 8%, 8% for those years, as opposed to previously a 6.5% cap. The problem is that since that deal was signed, costs have got just massively out of hand.
Wage costs?
Most of it's driven by wage costs, but all costs have gone up. And there's a lot of tension even among the states over who's to blame for that. Did the Victorians allow too much of a wage increase that's flowed into other states because other unions demand the same thing? So they've lost control of that part of it. And the Commonwealth saying, we'll give you the annual increases, but that means you probably won't get to the 42.5.
And this is connected to the negotiations over the NDIS as well. They're kind of linked here, Tom.
Yeah, the states are negotiating with the federal government about foundational supports and this new program that's supposed to start next year. I think Mark Butler's got a very difficult task ahead of him, corralling them to sign up to that program, get that underway without spending billions and billions. Equally, I think there's concern at the state and territory level that side deals are going to be negotiated to buy off individual governments to try and build. It's as complex as ever negotiations with the states are when money's involved.
It certainly is. All right, our panel, Tom, McIlroy, Samantha Maiden, Jacob Greber, back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with executive producer for the ABC, Zoe Norton Lodge, and a very warm welcome.
Thanks, Mike.
Zoe, the war in Gaza is coming up to its second anniversary, but Donald Trump has his own plan for peace, it seems. What could possibly go wrong?
Nothing, surely.
Kathy Wilcox has highlighted some of the potential hurdles that we might be encountering here. So Trump and Blair and Netanyahu have a peace plan for Gaza.
Wait, Donald Trump lies about everything Trump? Riviera of the Middle East Trump?
Yeah, well.
And Blair, Tony Blair, weapons of mass destruction Blair, 100,000 Iraqi civilians as collateral damage Blair.
Sure, but...
And Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu, propped up by Hamas Netanyahu, there will be no Palestinian state Netanyahu.
Yeah, so fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I think basically we covered everything there, Kathy.
I know.
This is top shelf stuff from our friend Mr. Rowe here, who's channeling Neville Chamberlain, which is peace in my time. There is an obsession with the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
I think it's probably because Obama got one and he wants to have one too.
Sounds good. Well, I mean, I wouldn't mind one.
I'd like that on my CV.
Yeah. I do like how he's, tattooed all of his promises on his body, so maybe he'll remember them. Do you think that's what's going on there?
I think it probably is, yeah.
I can't see AUKUS submarines tattooed there, though. So.
No. Matt Golding, did you say peace?
Yes, but which piece?
Yeah, I think he's looking at it as Gaza Lago.
Exactly, it's just another real estate project.
Yeah.
So just a really complicated one and horrible one.
Yeah, to me the highlight is Pete Hegseth in the little designer handbag.
I know, I love it. I didn't know I was waiting for Pete Hegseth in a designer handbag in my life, but I was.
The Department of War.
I know.
What do you think about the name change?
Oh, it's doing what it says on the tin, isn't it? I think he's just trying really hard to get the US on that no travel list, isn't he?
Yeah.
Look, I've never been more glad of the placement of a podium in a cartoon in my life, I must say.
My generals get ready to do America first. Yeah, it's a bit disturbing.
It certainly is disturbing.
It's a lot, right?
It's all a lot.
Zoe, Optus had its own emergency this week as the 000 line went down for a second time. David Rowe here, drawing Annika Wells at the door, and the Optus CEO, I think, is here looking out the window.
I mean, it's clear that they're not entirely sure what to do about the situation.
Yeah.
But, I've been thinking about it, and they could just charge everyone 000 on the next Optus bill.
Hello, 000, hello, as the opt-out, yes.
Yeah.
Holy corporate fail, Batgirl. I did love this Matt Golding. Holy critical communications and corporate risk management failure, Batman. There's the Optus emergency sign is being broadcast to the sky.
I know. I mean, Batman looks about as perplexed as I am that this system was more fragile than we thought.
It really is, isn't it? The PM kicked off the week in the United Kingdom where he was reunited with the King. Brett Lethbridge has picked up on the PM's trip, Republic here. Well, maybe we say God save Albo, because it looks like nothing's going to save a republic.
Oh, indeed. I mean, it is a confusing agenda, we must admit.
Yeah.
Sort of disturbed about how much of public money he spent on those souvenirs. Have you been to Piccadilly Circus? That would have cost a fortune.
I know, right?
Yeah.
They're not cheap.
No.
Chris Downs here seems to suggest that the Chucker's still cleaning up at Windsor from the Trump visit. We would have met at Windsor Castle, but there are orange makeup stains all over the furniture.
I mean, look, I know he wants to blame it on Trump, but I think King Charles stays up all night eating twisties and getting crumbs everywhere, and that's why there's orange stains. That's my guess.
Warren Bound has picked up on the fact that you should never bring a sword to a sub fight. Chuck here is going to lend some armour, it seems. Just bring it back when you've finished with it.
Oh, you're too kind, Your Majesty.
Yeah. The King offers the PM assistance for his upcoming meeting with Donald Trump. It would be very daunting. It could go any way.
I mean, daunting, yeah, it could go anywhere. I mean, the armoury's a good idea, but I'm kind of intrigued that that the Britons want their priceless treasures returned after they've been used. Maybe tell that to the rest of the world, King Charles.
Yeah. Look, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. I'll let you do the honours.
Back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. Tom.
COP31 remains the big unfinished business for the government in the climate space this year. Chris Bowen engaged in some pretty deft and careful diplomacy in New York last week or the week before. The Turkish climate minister this weekend has been with the EU in Brussels. He said that it's Turkey's right to host, and he said that they got out of the way for Britain and Germany and France previously, and they're not moving this time. So I think it's pretty difficult.
Doesn't sound like they're giving ground. All right, Sam.
I thought that your interview with Larissa Waters was a really interesting example sometimes of how you can use a lot of words but not make a lot of sense. But there was one thing that she said that really stood out for me, and this idea that when you're talking about anti-Semitism, that you suddenly start talking about whether or not we're selling Israel arms. I just think that if you've got children that are being subjected to anti-Semitism, or indeed children that are going to an Islamic school being subjected to, similar sort of racially charged attacks, what another country is doing is not relevant, right? I mean, we need to protect those children and those communities here in Australia, and I just thought it was really inappropriate that she kept answering a different question.
Jacob.
Annika Wells is in the hot seat over Optus. She'll probably be in the hot seat on the gambling advertising issue as well this week. She's been doing the rounds, getting across the detail of that. My sense is that there may be some movement among the different players who are normally resistant, but the government's also very conscious of the need to compensate the big media companies that rely on this revenue in a very, very difficult operating environment in terms of ad revenue. And worth watching our colleague Steve Kinane upcoming tomorrow night, Four Corners report into this issue.
He is deep into this issue, and that will be a story worth watching for sure. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Finally, hundreds of top US military commanders were summoned to a rare meeting in Virginia during the week, where they were told by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth that he was sick of seeing fat generals at the Pentagon. Well, after sitting through that, most of them stony-faced, then there was followed by an awkward moment when Donald Trump took to the stage. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
I've never walked into a room so silent before. This is very... Oh, don't laugh. You're not allowed to do that. You know what? Just have a good time. And if you want to applaud, you applaud. And if you want to do anything you want, you can do anything you want. And if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave the room.
Of course, there goes your rank, there goes your future.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.